architects would submit their designs. Out of 172 submittees, the winner was Finnish-American architect Eero Saarinen, whose design was the arch. Construction of the arch began on February 12, 1963, and ended 2.5 years later on October 28, 1965. The cost alone to build the arch was $13 million. If you're looking for today's money, it's crazy expensive to get a memorial like this built up. Would it be surprising to tell you guys that no workers died during the building of this monument? And from that high up, they had nothing to stop it from falling to the ground. No safety harnesses, no safety cables, nothing. These were top-of-the-art experienced workers working on this. To know more about the construction of the arch, visit our award-winning film in our theater, Monument to the Dream. It's shown at the top of every hour, plays 35 minutes. The name for this park when it was constructed was called the Jefferson National Expansion Memorial, but that all changed a few years ago due to our Bloomington construction project. Today we are called Gateway Arch National Park. We are the 60th national park in the country. We include 91 acres of parkland, the Gateway Arch, and if you guys saw when you came this way, the old courthouse, which we are hoping to get refurbished and remodeled in 2025. The Gateway Arch stands 630 feet tall and 630 feet wide. This is the tallest man-made monument in the U.S., taller than the Washington Monument and the Statue of Liberty combined. It is made of 142 stainless steel sections, with concrete adding support to the 300-foot mark. It's designed to look like a catenary curve, like when you hold both ends of a chain together and you flip it upside down a little. Today, the arch stands as a symbol of St. Louis, as well as a memorial to the architecture designed in the 1960s. Now, for those of you who were around during that time, back then the 60s was an era of many possible ideas that became a reality, like, say, building a metal stainless steel arch to putting a man on the moon, So before we head to this next part of our tour, we're going to take a super short look back at some of the things that happened during the decades surrounding the construction of the arch. Ladies and gentlemen, on the screens in front of and behind you, I present to you the 1960s.
The following program is brought to you in living color. Good evening, folks, and a hearty welcome to our drive-in theater.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
The bill that I am presenting to you will be known as a civil rights bill. Its object is to open the city of hope to all people of all races.
You're trying 15 today?
Well, the parachute's ready and I'm ready and I'm not going to miss today.
I think you paid your part, full ticket. Thank you for the demonstration.
You are about to participate in a great adventure, which reaches from the inner mind to the outer limits.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles!
Since 1946, the St. Louis Cardinals win the World Series. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. So the fight is over and Muhammad Ali is still the champion.
Our business is singing, and tonight we're gonna take care of business.
For those who think that the women's liberation movement is a joke, may I disabuse you of that notion.
Free at last! Free at last! Thank God Almighty! We're free at last!
All right, so what do you guys think of that little presentation in the 1960s? Don't be open. When they open, we ask you to stay behind the railings and watch your head step when you're entering your cars. These doors are 4 feet tall and they're made of stainless steel. Do not take photos entering or exiting your cars. That has been a safety hazard in the past and is bad news. The ride is going to be 4 minutes up and 3 minutes down, and you have a little less than 10 minutes at the top to get photos. Anything else you want to do at the top? Once again, my name is Ryan. It's been a pleasure being a tour guide. Enjoy your experience at the top. Yes, those doors are open. You can.
This is claustrophobia, moderate. Well, thank you. Watch your step.
Please make your way up those stairs to the left and up the stairs. Those steps are uneven. Again, welcome to the top. As you come up, please keep walking towards the middle so we can get everybody on the same page. You're on the same.
Hi, folks. Hi. Hi. Oh, whoa.
Well,
Nice to
enjoy
meet
the
you
rest
all.
of your time.
And have a good trip.
Thank you. You guys as well.
Have a good life. Thank you.
Back, everyone. Head on down that way.
Okay.
La luce che tu dai nel cuore resterà a ricordarci che l'eterna stella sei nella mia preghiera. Quanta fede c'è, lead us to a place, guide us with your grace, give us faith so we'll be saved. Sogniamo un mondo senza più violenza, un mondo di giustizia e di speranza. Ognuno guide us with your grace, give us faith so we'll be saved. Sento che ci salverai.
Yeah, the meat is already mixed together.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
so we order turkey curry.
Okay, turkey curry.
Yeah, one
Okay.
curry and one couple of ham and shoulder.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
All right, guys.
All right,
See you
thank
enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, from Taiwan.
Yeah, all right. Welcome.
Yeah, well,
kitchen behind. So it was a very simple house. In 1839, Springfield had just become the capital of Illinois. There were 1,500 people living here. And this was on the outskirts of town. It was open prairie behind this house. So it was literally the edge. The wealthy people lived up by the Capitol. The middle class people lived here. The neighborhood was also integrated. There were 31 African Americans in a 3-block region. There were also people from immigrants from Portugal, Ireland, and Germany. So it's a busy neighborhood. And I don't want to forget to tell you, but you can also go into that house. That has dioramas of this, all the changes made over the years. So it's interesting to see. And then there's a house across the street, the gray one. That shows you about changes in the neighborhood. So that's good. But quite honestly, your kids might want to play those games if they still have the games going when you get done. The games of fun that they have across the street. Now, Abraham and Mary, they got married in 1842 in her sister's house. Her sister lived near the Capitol, very fancy house. And this house actually right here is a 3/4 replica of it, because the original was torn down. And the Park Service allowed it to stay even though they were trying to go back to 1860 because it related to the Lincoln. So they were married, but they didn't have a lot of money, so they moved into a tavern where they rented one room, and their son Robert was born in that room. They later went on and had 3 more sons, so they had 4 boys in 10 years. In 1844, they bought this for $1,500. They moved in with 9-month-old Robert. In 1856, they put the 2nd floor on. Now, Mr. Lincoln traveled a lot for his business. He was a lawyer, and he, a judge, and other lawyers would go to small towns in Illinois and do cases because they didn't have a judge or lawyers. And so for 3 months in the spring and 3 months in the fall, he would be gone. So he was away when the top was taken off and the 2nd story was put up. So when he came back, now remember his house looked like that when he left, he comes back to this and says to his neighbor, "Excuse me, sir, can you tell me where the Lincolns live?" Because he made a joke. And the one thing about him, he was very, very, very funny. He had an incredible sense of humor. Now, if I say something is original, it means it belonged to the Lincolns. So we're going to go in through the front door, and you're going to see a coat rack, and that was theirs. So picture that tall man coming home at night and putting his stovepipe hat on that and his shawl, and then finding his way to wherever he had to find in the house. So we'll start with that, and then we will go into the parlor. So come on into the Lincoln home. It does have air conditioning. Yeah.
Wow.
So that is it. That's the original coat rack. And then you can go into the parlor and just move a little bit to the right. You don't have to worry too much. Yes, you can. All the photos you want. We just ask that you silence your phone. So you are now the esteemed guests of Abraham and Mary Lincoln. This has the best decor. It has the best furniture. And so their best guests come into this room. But it didn't always look this way. When they bought this house, the parlor in the back, beyond this door, wasn't there. There was no room there at all. There was a kitchen over to the right, and that was it. Then 2 rooms here and a loft upstairs. But 2 years into their residency here, Mrs. Lincoln was having her 2nd son. So they turned this area into a bedroom. And for 10 years it was a bedroom, until they built the upstairs. They had their sons, Eddie, Willie, and Tad. Now, Tad was born Thomas. That was Mr. Lincoln's father's name. However, Mr. Lincoln noticed that he had a large head and a long, wiggly body. And he said, he looks like a tadpole. Let's call him Tad. So that's how we ended up with that nickname. I told you we had a sense of humor. So that took care of that. But I call this room the room of tears and triumph. Tears because when it was a bedroom, little Eddie passed away right before his 4th birthday from tuberculosis. And they held his funeral in the front parlor. Triumph because when it did look like this, Mr. Lincoln was nominated by the Republican National Convention to be their candidate for the presidency. And he knew that, but it was common for a committee to come and make a speech. So they arrived on Saturday, May 19th at 8 o'clock at night. We are told that Mr. Lincoln was in the back of the parlor, and he greeted them. They made a speech, he made a speech. He said, undoubtedly I will accept, but I want to review the platform. So he wanted to know what he was buying before he bought it. So he spent 4 days thinking about it, talking to people, and then he wrote a lovely letter back stating he would do that. Do you have gum? We can't have gum. I'm sorry, you weren't there to know that. Can we just get, okay? Do you see the black chairs? That is horsehair. And you know what they did when they would comb the mane of the horse or comb their tail? They took the hair and then they colored it and they made it part of the chair. So 95% of that is original. Also, the marble table at the end, to the front, that is original. And in front of me is what we would call a knick-knack shelf, but they called it a whatnot shelf with Lincoln's bust. That is original. Then in the back parlor, on top of the mantle, there are candelabra. Those are original. And when we go through this room, you'll see that there's a bookcase in the back, and that's original. And it does have one of Mr. Lincoln's books, The Life of Black Hawk. Pretty cool, huh? Been here for a long time. So anyway, when Mr. Lincoln was elected, people didn't know in the East, they didn't know who he was or how he lived or how anyone lived in Illinois. So a New York newspaper sent out an illustrator, and those are the pictures. See the pictures on the floor? Those are the pictures. He drew this room and the room across the hall. Now he didn't put any color in. So when the curators were trying to put this back together, they had to figure it out. The carpeting and the wallpaper are not original in any of the rooms. There's one exception which I'll explain when we get there, but they're not. So they had to guess what somebody in 1860 would have used to decorate their rooms. And also, usually the carpet was cut in 27-inch pieces, and then they'd sew it together. So they'd buy as much as they needed to fill a room. But after the winter, they would take it, they would disconnect it, and clean it, store it, and they would put straw down to try to protect their floors from all the dirt that came in. Now another thing, Mr. and Mrs. Lincoln sold most of what they owned before they went to Washington. They did. And a gentleman rented their house. He was an executive with the railroad. He paid $350 a month. And he bought Mr. Lincoln's bed, and he bought a few other things. Well, he moved to Chicago 4 years later, and everything went up in flames in the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. But you will see we got back quite a bit, despite all that, from the neighbors and the friends and everyone else. I want to point out at the very back of the room is a super long couch, which you'll see as we go that way. Mr. Lincoln ordered that a few months before he went to Washington. It's 7 feet long, because he was big. He was 6 feet 4 inches. So it was really hard for him to find comfortable furniture, so that he ordered before he left, and that was saved by a friend while they were in the White House. Also, I want to tell you, Mrs. Lincoln had a party for 500 people. Oh yeah. The question is, how do you fit 500 people in this house? Well, I guess you don't, because you send the invitation with a time on it. So they would come and expect to stay for 30 minutes, and then they would go, and more people would come. But out of the 500, 200 did not come. Some of them went to a wedding, and she found that unforgivable. So she wrote their names down. I don't know what she did with that list, but I suspect they were never invited back again. Now this wall here, these folding doors could be closed. They were put in 1856 when the upstairs went on. And so Mr. Lincoln could close this and he could have his own office here in his own library. So he liked that space. And we are told that after he was elected, an ambassador from Mexico came to visit with him because Mexico is dealing with an invasion by the French and they wanted some help from the United States. After that, he had an office at the old State House, so he saw people there. But he did see this one ambassador here in this house. So do you have any questions about the parlor, the fancy room? No?
I was just going to ask, did they move out while the second floor was being
Yes.
added? Okay.
Yep, they
You know
did.
where they moved, or?
Well, there's debate. Some people say she moved into her sister's house. Other people say she went back to Kentucky.
Oh,
So I'm
okay.
not sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know what the truth is, but they did move out because it was quite a mess. All right, so go through the dining room into the sitting room, and I'll meet you in the sitting room. Yeah, there is. This is the fun room. Come up against the railings. Okay, is there room for everyone? Okay, move down more so we make room for everyone. Okay. This is the fun room. This is the playroom. This is where the action happens. Picture Mr. Lincoln on the floor wrestling with Tad and Willie. Plus, there would be a dog, Fido, jumping and nipping and trying to get in on the action. And if that is not enough, Mr. Lincoln's favorite hobby was collecting cats. So there'd be some cats here. In the White House, he had two. They were called Tabby and Dixie. But here we don't know their names. Also, Mr. Lincoln was inducted into the National Wrestling Hall of Fame in 1992. He was a very good wrestler. Very good wrestler. He won 300, he lost 1, so they inducted him. Now, when it became quiet, they might go over to the game table. Now, that chess set is not original, but a broken pawn was found in the backyard by the archaeologists, so they traced it back to that set. So that's an imitation set of what they probably had. In that brown box with the black eyes, that's a stereoscope. That's like virtual reality or a Viewmaster. You put a card in and you see in 3 dimensions. In 1857, that was a super big deal. They paid $20 for that. That equals $700. They paid a lot of money. And the Lincolns were very generous with their children. He said it gave him pleasure that his children were free and happy and unrestrained by parental tyranny. That means they were spoiled, uncontrolled, and undisciplined. Yes. They had both had unhappy childhoods. Their moms died when they were young, so they were very, very liberal with their children. Now, if it got quiet again in the room, Mrs. Lincoln might go to this table over here, which was a sewing table, and that was also her mirror. And then the mantle has some holes. We think that's where they would have hung their Christmas stockings. Also, Mr. and Mrs. Lincoln liked to read to their kids. He would take a chair, because he didn't fit in those chairs, so he'd put it on its side. And they would read poetry or literature. But something people don't know, he always, always, always read out loud, even in the White House, as an adult. And his love partner asked him why, because he found it annoying at the office. And he said, well, I capture the idea with 2 senses. I hear it, I see it, and then I remember it better. He also said later on that his mind was like a piece of steel, almost impossible to scratch anything on it, but very difficult to remove it once it was there. So if he read a poem at 16, he could recite it at 36. But he worked really, really hard to remember. And we believe that he went to a couple of what they called blab schools. They didn't have paper and pencils, and they didn't have books. So the teacher would give the lesson, and the kids would then say the lesson over and over and over and over, and that's how they learned. So we wonder if that's why he read out loud for his whole life. Any questions about this fun room? No? You like this room?
This carpet is pieced, I see.
Yes, again, because that's how it would have been.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they were pieced. So their hired help had a lot of work because they would have to clean that, they'd have to take it up, they'd have to put it down. Yeah, they had a lot of work here. No question about it.
And you knew the pattern so you could reproduce it?
They did not know the pattern. No, they were guessing from what they saw in the pictures.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, they were just doing the best they could. All right, now listen, there's one artifact we can touch, and that's the railing, and Mr. Lincoln touched it. This is the original railing. It's been here forever. So the Park Service says this is as close as you can get to shaking the hand of Abraham Lincoln. Now at the top, I'm going to have you turn left because there's a guest bedroom. Everything in there belonged to the Lincolns, all that furniture. And it has the only bed that belonged to the Lincolns that's still in the house. So look at the guest bedroom, then I'm going to meet you across the hall, and that's where we run into the blue carpet. We have to stay on the blue carpet, which won't be hard because there's not a lot of us. So we'll be good. All right, let's go.
Abraham's bed is going to be big.
You know, the floor, everything was paved in there. The same building, we had it corrected and then they got.
这是唯一可以跟林肯握手的地方。
Once you've done that, you come over here. Once you've seen that, let's see that one first.
很像澡堂。
Yeah. All right, everybody come in. Stay on the stay. Yes, he had to have a big bed. Stay on the blue rug and we're good. Now, this was built in 1856, so they were only here for 4.5 years. Most of their time was downstairs. So the back of the parlor was a bedroom for 10 years. But finally, when they could afford it, they raised the roof and they put this up. Mr. Lincoln had this bedroom. This was a master bedroom suite, and Mrs. Lincoln had behind me. And that was not uncommon if you could afford to do it. But for them, it made sense. Mrs. Lincoln still had Tad and Willie with her. And so she had a trundle bed that she would pull out at night and they'd sleep on it. Also, she had migraine, so it was good for her to have some space. Mr. Lincoln didn't sleep a lot, so he would be up half the night. So he was either reading, writing, corresponding. So it was nice for him to have a space to get up and get down if he wished to. Now, what I find exciting is that is his wardrobe. That belonged to him, that dresser belonged to him, and the desk in the corner, the pigeonhole desk belonged to him. Now that desk he bought as a very young lawyer. When he first came to Springfield, he was very poor. And eventually he started working, and he was able to save up to buy that desk. At one point, a leg broke, and Mrs. Lincoln threw it out. Mr. Lincoln brought it back. So he kept his desk. We don't know exactly what was written there, but I'm sure there were some magical words because he was so prolific in what he wrote. Yeah. So there. Now, you mentioned the bed. How long do you think this, it's very misleading, how long do you think this bed is? 7 feet, you're close, it's 6'9". 6'9". Yeah, you're close, it's 6'9". What do you think of the wallpaper? Yeah. Interesting. People like it or they don't. Interesting is a word I hear a lot. Well,
it's amazing. Look how high it is.
Well, they're 11 feet because of the style of the house. Back here, they're 9 feet. But to get the front the way they wanted it, the style, the curator tells us they made this 11 feet. So in 1988, the National Park Service literally took this house apart board by board. And there's a great YouTube video. It's entitled The Lincolns of Springfield, and it shows you just what they did. So on this wall, they were scraping away paint and old wallpaper. When they got to the bottom, they found a patch of this. Oh, so then they knew. Then they knew. And they researched and found out that Mrs. Lincoln had bought it from a local merchant, but imported it from France. And she spoke French, she wrote French, so she liked French. So that was her thing. Now, she also was educated. She had gone to school for 12 years, which girls did not. And of course, he only went for 8 months. And that was like a day here, a week here, maybe 2 weeks, much, much later. So he didn't go 8 months in a row. But anyway, so she was very well educated. Now, I want you to look at the boots to the left of the dresser. They're not his, but they are his size. What size do you think they are?
6'9".
They're 14s. Yeah, you guys were close. And then to the right is a hat. It's not his hat, because his hat was bigger and higher. But it has papers in it, because Mr. Lincoln used his hat as an office. He was out on the prairie a lot. So if he received mail, you on the blue carpet, by the way? Yeah, you gotta watch the carpet. Yeah. But anyway, if he was out there, he would get mail and put it in his hat. If he wanted to write himself a note, he put it in his hat. If he was reading a speech or writing a speech, he put it in his hat. And I read a letter that he wrote to someone where he said, "I apologize for the delay in responding. I received your letter, I put it in my hat, and then I bought a new one." So that took care of that for a little while, till he remembered. Now this shaving mirror is set for someone 6'4", and we don't know if it was his, but it is of that period. Do you have any questions about this room? No? All right, we're going to go through Mrs. Lincoln's room. She has the oldest artifact in the house. It is a dresser to the left of her bed. It came with her from Kentucky, so it's over 200 years old. Also, she has the most dangerous artifact, and that is the dress on her bed. It didn't belong to her, but the color was obtained by using copper arsenic, which is a poison. Yeah, so we'll walk through there, and then I'll meet you in the hall.
That's going to be on top. That's top.
Yep. When Robert went to school in 1859, Tad and Willie took over his bedroom. I think more importantly, Mrs. Lincoln got her own bedroom. And don't worry about, at the end is the hired helps room, but everyone's going to see that, so don't worry about it. Everyone will see it. We're going to stay on this floor for a few minutes. All right, so they had 17 helpers in 17 years. Some of them lived here. They were immigrant girls trying to earn extra money for their families. They made $1.50 a week, and they had Sundays off. So they worked 6 days with Sundays off, and they worked very hard. By the way, the floor in that room is the only original floor in the house, and the color is original. Now the boys here were a little bit on the wild side, and one of the helpers wrote to her family to say, I had to wash the walls because the boys applied mud all over. I guess when you don't have to clean it up, you just kind of do your own thing. So they were a little bit mischievous, no doubt about that. Also, in this hallway, you can see the transom windows up above. Yep, that helped with the circulation. And that door that's closed, that was a trunk closet for their off-season clothing. Now, getting back to the hired help, they also brought people in from the neighborhood, and Mariah Vance was an African-American woman who cooked for them for 10 years. And they were both from Kentucky, so she made a dish they loved. It was corn pone and bacon, and that's an eggless cornbread that you make into an oval like a pancake, and then you fry it in bacon grease. Well, Robert went to see her when he was 53 in 1896 because he was doing business in Danville and she lived there. So sure enough, she made that for him. So we know he liked it. Also, they would make chicken fricassee with biscuits, corned beef and cabbage, venison stew, and Mr. Lincoln loved apple pie and he loved his wife's almond cake. So they did pretty well with food. Now I want to give you a little history about the family and what happened to them. So Mrs. Lincoln never came back here. Willie died at age 11 in the White House. He had typhoid fever. So what she had left after the president died was Robert in his early 20s starting his career, and then Tad. And she felt this was a home where she'd been happy, but she would never be happy here again, so she didn't come back. So it was rented until 1884. Robert offered it to the state of Illinois then for $1 with two provisions, that they take care of it and that they never charge an entrance fee. So that's why no one's ever charged to see the house. Of course, he didn't know about parking. That's unfortunate. If he'd waited a little longer. Then the federal government, the National Park Service took it over in 1972. In 1988, they restored the house. And then they began on the neighborhood. They bought the 12 acres around, and the idea was to bring it back to 1860. My understanding is there was a Piggly Wiggly grocery store in that lot where children are playing now. They got rid of that. There was a souvenir shop. They got rid of that. Any house they couldn't bring back to 1860, they got rid of it. The lot beside this house had a house. They took it down because they were afraid it was a fire hazard to this house. They just didn't want anything close to this house. They only have one more house to restore, so everything has been brought back to 1860, and most of them are offices for the National Park Service. But at the end of one road, Senator Dick Durbin does rent a house for his staff and himself when he is here. Now, Robert was the only one to survive because Tad died at 18. We don't know if it was tuberculosis and pneumonia. He'd been in Europe with his mother for almost 3 years. On the ship back, he became sick. She brought him back to Chicago, where he lingered for 3 months, and then he passed away. So now there's only one Lincoln to survive, and that was Robert. Robert went on to have 3 children. He had a son who he named Abraham, but they called him Jack, and 2 daughters. Abraham passed away from blood poisoning at 16. So at one point, there were 2 Abrahams in the tomb, because he was brought there to the tomb. The 2 girls went on, and between them they had 3 kids. But their kids had no kids. So the great-grandchildren of Abraham and Mary Lincoln had no children. So the line died out in 1985. Now, Robert is not at the tomb because his wife felt that he deserved to be at Arlington National Cemetery. During the war, he was at Harvard, then he graduated, came back and wanted to fight. His mother said, absolutely not. I've lost one son here in the White House. I will not lose another. So the president got a hold of General Grant and said, can he be on your staff? So, of course, he said yes. So he was at Appomattox when General Lee surrendered. Then he went on to be a Secretary of War for 2 presidents, and he was our ambassador to the United Kingdom for another. And then he made a lot of money as president of the Pullman Railroad Company. So she thought he deserves his own place in the sun. So she put him in Arlington, even though there is a spot for him at the tomb. And that's the story I wanted to make sure I told you, so that you got that information. Any questions about this area or anything about the house so far? Because we'll end up in the kitchen downstairs, but this is kind
How
of...
big's Abraham's car?
He didn't have a car. Good question, though. I like that car. He had a horse. And you know what his horse's name was? Old Bob, because his son was young Bob. So he had a horse. They didn't have cars back when he was a boy. I think he would have enjoyed it.